Hi BookTube, and welcome to my final recent reads of 2025. There'll just be one more video after this, which will be my top 10 reads of the year and my reading stats, and possibly my worst read of the year. I don't know. I haven't even begun to research that video, so I don't know what's going to be in it. So for the final time this year, the books I've read: Alindarkara's Children by the Belarusian writer Alihierd Bacharevic, and this was translated by Jim Dingley and Petra Reed. Helen DeWitt and Ilya Gridneff, Your Name Here. A Short Stay in Hell by Stephen L. Peck. Emile Habiby, The Secret Life of Saeed the Pessoptimist. 2016 by Sarah Hesketh, which is some non-fiction about the great events of 2016, done through a series of interviews. And finally, Ginsberg, Howl and Other Poems. So in my last video, I remarked that there were a couple of books which had two or more translators, which I wondered how that would work. I'm not talking about a collection of short stories. I'm talking about how a unified novel can be translated by two different people working together. By complete coincidence, this book has two translators, as I say, Jim Dingley and Petra Reed, and there's a very good reason for that. It's about language. It's about a clash of language, a contestation of two languages, those languages being Russian and Belarusian, as in the authorities in Belarus with Russian influence, because Belarus is really a puppet Russian state, want to suppress the Belarusian language. And in the original, I assume it's written, parts of the book are written in Russian and parts are written in Belarusian. Hence, you have two translators. And the decision they have made to keep that separation between Russian and Belarusian in the English version, because if it's all just in English, you'd lose that whole sort of clash and conflict if it was all in one language. The decision taken in this book is a really interesting one. It's done partly in English and partly in Scottish language, and on the basis that sort of approximates the relationship between Russian and Belarusian as a language. And the first thing to say is, without them taking that decision, we English readers would not be able to read this book. So it's a really, vital service that the two translators have rendered. However, it sort of anglicizes and takes away the strange and alienness and integrity of the original, which obviously I haven't read, but this is much more closer and recognisable to me because it's all in English and Scots. And to be honest, although there is a glossary of terms, most of the words in Scots are recognised. You can figure out what they mean without having recourse to the glossary. So I'm wondering what the original book I can't read the original book in Russian and Belarusian, but I wonder what that reading experience, how that would compare with reading this rather anglicized sort of version of it. It's just removed it from the bosom of the culture of Belarusia and made it more sort of anglicized. And I think it loses something from that. But like I say, if they hadn't have undertaken this endeavour in the first place, we wouldn't have the book at all. So I'm very grateful to them. But it's an interesting decision. And as I was reading the book, I was really thinking, long and hard as to the pros and cons of that sort of decision of how to translate this book. Okay, so what's it about? So it opens in a camp for children who are Belarusian speakers. And they're in that camp to have the Belarusian knocked out of them and to be taught, brainwashed even, to speak Russian only. And there's a sinister doctor in the camp who believes that the reason that the people who speak Belarusian, which to his ear is a very ugly language, is that there's a physical bone in the throat that normal Russian speakers don't have, and that this bone needs removing. So really sinister. You're in a camp, a re-education camp, so you've got echoes of the Soviet era, but also sort of sinister doctor. You've got echoes of the Nazi doctors like Mengele. It's brilliant. It's a brilliant setup. And their father and his newish girlfriend arrive and basically bust them out the camp. These two children, their brother and sister, although the brother has somewhat of a strange status, which you sort of realise through the book, because the father was separated from the mother of the girl, and the father is bringing her up on his own, and he's very committed to the cause. It's really him who instills in her. He won't allow her to speak Russian at all at home, and when she goes to school, he's encouraged her not to open her mouth. And then sort of one day this boy appears, younger than her, but sort of, not a baby, and he's essentially there to look after her when the father can't be around, such as at school. So he busts his kids out, and they sort of drive pedal to the metal to get away from the camp, but the car breaks down, and it's in the sort of deep Belarusian forest, which I think is similar to the sort of Lithuanian and Estonian forests, very dense, and also a world of sort of fairy tales. And the kids, because they sort of don't like the girlfriend, they lose their parents, go off on their own way, and then you begin to get sort of streams like things like Hansel and Gretel. You also get the Golem of Prague. There are all these sort of influences in the book, which are brilliantly woven together. So we have these sort of different narrative strains. We have the father's story, we have the kid's story, we have this sinister doctor who, when he finds they've escaped, the kids, he sends out his sort of patient Zero, the first one he experimented on with his bone thing, who has basically sort of gone mad. He sends him out to go and recover them. There's sort of bits of sort of magical realism, not a phrase I like using, in it. As I say, it's more like sort of elements of sort of fairy tale. It's just beautifully woven together. And again, returning to this device of the Scottishness. So when the kids, or when any character speaks Belarusian, it's done in Scots. But in between sections of dialogue, there are original Scottish poems that thematically relate to what the chapter is dealing with. So lots of Rabbie Burns, for example, but not just Burns, others of his contemporaries who were writing poetry in Scots. And I have to say, I just so enjoyed them, because I've not read Burns, I've not read sort of poems written in the original Scots dialect. But piecing together the relevance of those to what else has been described or written about in the chapter, I just enjoyed that experience. But again, there were instances where those weren't original Scots poems. They were original Belarusian, fairly modern day Belarusian poems, translated into Scots, which is, there's a note in here saying what a unique thing that is, where you have Belarusian translated to, Scots dialect. But again, to me, that just underlined the sort of slightly alienating thing about translating Belarusian into Scots. It's all right within the novel and the plot and everything, because there's a logic to it. But when you're doing these sort of flourishes of the poetry, sort of intervals in the text, to then translate Belarusian poems and folk songs into Scots, just again something just sort of didn't sit right with me. However, all that being said, I thought this was a terrific book, terrific reading experience, really interesting. It really sets your brain sort of buzzing, trying to figure out where you stand on various of the artistic decision taking. 5 stars, really good. Be interested to see if it gets in my top 10. And on to Helen DeWitt and Ilya Gridneff's Your Name Here, which apparently has taken 20 years to realise. I've not read Helen DeWitt's The Last Samurai. I have bought it, but I haven't got to it yet. So I think I was excited by the talk around this book on Twitter and things, that it's quite sort of experimental, postmodern. So I sort of leapt in with, maybe I needed to have read Helen DeWitt before to know what kind of writer she is, but I didn't. So the first thing to say is it's going to be really hard to talk about this book. What does it mean? I don't know. Now, books don't have to have meaning. They certainly don't have to convey a message. And this book does not, I think, convey a message, but that doesn't disqualify it. Having said that, I'm sat here talking about books. In order to do that, you need to be able to sort of interpret books, and you can't really interpret this book, or you can, but it's a very open-ended way. Again, I don't think that's necessarily a problem. My personal preference, and why I gave this 4 stars rather than 5, is because I'm not sure what it was all about and what it was all for, but it was an utterly endearing and enjoyable reading experience all the same. So it's sort of a book within a book. It cites Italo Calvino's If on a Winter's Night, A Traveller's Tale, or something like that, which I have read many years ago, which is, I think, lots of different sort of openings to books, but they're all different books, so it's they're not directly in conversation with each previous book, but obviously underneath that there are linkages. There was a Stanislaw Lem, I can't remember if it was a novel or a short story, but again, this idea of opening chapters for books, but they're not the same book, so it's a series of opening chapters to different books. So it's that type of thing. At least that's how it's presented, and Calvino is cited a lot of times by DeWitt here. But I don't think it is. I think it is largely a couple of books. What's mutating is not the books, it's the 2 main characters. So we have Helen DeWitt and Ilya Gridneff here, but we also have them undertaking various pseudonyms, particularly in email conversations, where they are sort of shape-shifting. So the book is not shape-shifting, even though I think it likes to claim that it is. It's these 2 figures of DeWitt and Gridneff who are the shapeshifters, or at least the name shifters. The book sprinkles a lot of references to books, but it doesn't do it in a sort of clever way that many authors do, that you have to spot the reference. It's quite upfront with them, and most of the books I've read, so I did appreciate that. But one book it never mentions, which I think is strange, is a non-fiction book, which is Roland Barthes' The Death of the Author, because this is called Your Name Here. And Barthes' theory of the death of the author is that when a book is sort of finished and put out in the market, the author no longer has any say in it, and it's the reader. Each individual reader makes that book, creates that book, renders that book as to how it means for them. So any 2 readers may read any book differently, and therefore it's almost like it's 2 different books. And hence, it should be the reader's name on the book rather than the author's. And I think this book is sort of inviting that, as I say, by this sort of open-ended interpretation. So to give you what I take to be the plot, such as there is one, that it starts off in a postmodern way, whereby a traveller waiting for their plane goes into an airport bookshop and sees this book called Your Name Here, buys it. And they are in the middle aisle. They are in the middle of the 3 chairs on the plane, and either side of them are passengers who are reading. One's reading Harry Potter. Can't remember what the other one's reading. So this is a book about books and about reading. And from there we jump into a Helen DeWitt well-established author, communicating with Ilya Gridneff, who is a journalist. He has sent her emails, as he does to lots of people, which are freewheeling, fantastical flights of literary and linguistic fancy, wordplay, all that sort of thing. And she's so impressed by them that she proposes that they should be able to get them published as a book. He points out that, they're emails. They've been sent to other people and he's deleted them. He doesn't have them access to them anymore. She says, well, why don't you contact those people you sent it to and see if they can send it back to you, and then we'll collate them. And that is the heart of the book, is the process by which they're trying to he's trying to reconstruct, although he's not very committed to it, because they're presented as spontaneous. He sat there typing an email, slightly jokey fashion to whoever, and all this sort of spill of words and wordplay, showing his sort of verbal dexterity, as it were. He's more sort of spontaneous and sort of fly by the seat of the pants than a sort of literary heritage or a literary archive, which is what they need in order to bring this book together. So, but he and Helen DeWitt within the book have alter egos. The main one being a female author who's written a book called Lotteryland, and we get selections of this book, Lotteryland, which is a great success and is being turned in the process of being turned into a film. And he, in various guises, he's always sort of mooching and sponging off friends, and he's always on the move, travelling around the world. He's a journalist. He's covered lots of foreign engagements and wars and things. But one of his alter egos is now that he's a tabloid journalist, covering celebrity and stuff. He's sort of fallen down the ladder of sort of high-minded journalism to the sort of lowest tabloid rung kind of thing. And so the writer of Lotteryland and this tabloid journalist, so there's lots of email exchanges between them, and they're constantly changing their names and their email handles as well. And that's it, really. I mean, there's a lot going on, there's a lot to admire, but that's the core structure of this book. And as I say, I don't think the book is shape-shifting. I think these two main characters are shape-shifting. That's what gives the book its sort of churn and moving on to new realities and stuff. Really enjoyable. As I say, I think it, at sort of final reckoning, having read it, it lacked a bit of a core. Certainly a core of meaning. So that's why I did knock a star off, but I do recommend it. And I will say, I finished this on Wednesday the 23rd of December. Is that right? No, maybe it's the 22nd. Yeah, it was the 20th. Tuesday. I finished it Tuesday the 23rd of December. Come Christmas Eve, the 24th, I sat down and started writing a new novel. And I think it was provoked and prompted by this, and to a lesser extent 2016, which I'll come on to, which I just read in one day, because that's a short book. I'd read that in the middle of reading this. I don't know what my novel's about, but I do know that it's going to have a structure similar to this, maybe not quite so. I was going to say, I don't think I as an author appear in my novel, but actually I probably do. So I think this book churned a lot of stuff up in me, to the point where after 24 hours thought, bang, I was sitting down at my laptop starting my own new novel. So I have to be very grateful to this book. And I would, if you like enigmatic books or puzzles or Pomo books, I would say that I would recommend this. If you like your fiction straight and realist, this is not for you. Anyway, 4 stars. And on to A Short Stay in Hell by Stephen L. Peck. So this was a fun read. Stephen L. Peck is ostensibly a philosopher, specifically the philosophy of biology. He's an academic. And this is a very short book. You can knock it off in a couple of hours maximum. And it starts off with people in the waiting room of hell having died, and a minion of Satan deciding what punishment best suits them. But it's not Christian punishment, it's not Islamic hell, it's not Jewish hell. Turns out that the one true religion was Zoroastrianism, and which comes as a shock to everyone, atheists and religious person of faith alike. And so he decides what the, as I say, the appropriate punishment for each is. And they sort of disappear in a puff of smoke and go off to wherever he's condemned them to. We don't know where these places are. We only know our chosen guy, who's an author or a poet. I can't remember in the book now. And he is consigned to a library of almost infinite size, very much based on Roland Barthes. God, he's got Barthes on the brain. On Borges' The Library of Babel. And these people are charged, because Zoroastrianism is I believe, a religion of rebirth and resurrection. Reincarnation. These people are offered the carrot of being reincarnated the moment they find the book amongst all these infinite number of books that is about them, their life. Funny enough, I sort of had a similar idea in my 2017 novel, Three Dreams in the Key of G. But anyway, and so, you know, it's a very strange world that these people have to adapt themselves to, that sort of food is on tap from kiosks, like machines that deliver the food. Clothing is not personalised. It's the same. It's almost like sort of prison issue uniform, but it's cleaned and laundered and appears on their beds, which are in a series of pods around the library. You're not assigned a bed. You just, wherever you happen to be when sort of curfew and darkness drops. But there'll be laundry done for you and stuff. But the main occupation, because people want to be reincarnated and start life anew, is to find the Book of You. The problem is most of the books are gibberish. The language is gibberish, and gradually, you know, if someone finds a book that has a coherent sentence in it, one sentence, you know, it's a big reason for celebration, because it offers hope that this is the building block, this is the start. There will be books that make sense from beginning to end, but you have to find them, and there's sort of no clues, no reference systems, and unfortunately, as in the afterlife, as in life itself, cult develops, which is just violent cult, and they believe that this is the way to best serve, you know, the ruler of hell. You basically, you know, sow discord and chaos and violence around, so people are sort of fleeing that. And gradually, it's less about sort of trying to find the book of your life. This is actually a love story, and the second half of the book turns much more and addresses that much more, of people who have fallen in love within this world, have been separated because they're, you know, in the sort of chaos of fleeing this sort of, you know, cult gang. And it's the longing and the trying to sort of find them within an infinite space of this library. You don't know what floor they're on. You know, how are you going to find them? Well, you just have to put in the hard yards and go floor after floor after floor looking for them. It's beautifully done. It's surprisingly touching, but it's weird because it's been sort of quite philosophical in the first part. What is the potential nature of the afterlife, and how does that reflect on how we live life before we die? You know, what's important? What should we be doing? What gives meaning? All these sorts of philosophical questions. And then that turns halfway through and just develops into a beautiful love story. I'm not really one for love stories, but I was so caught off guard by that turn, by that sort of switch, that I was absolutely swept along in it. So I enjoyed this. 4 stars. And on to Emile Habiby, The Secret Life of Saeed, the Pessoptimist. So Saeed is self-confessed Pessoptimist, which he ascribes to all Palestinians. This is written in the 70s, not you know, it's not contemporary. So both a pessimist and an optimist, and because you're straddling that sort of tension between the two, you don't go to the extreme of either. So whatever happens to you, you could put a spin on it where it can both, while it might suggest, this is dire, your fate is sealed, the optimist part means no, you're not condemned to this, and vice versa. Equally, when something good happens, it doesn't mean you're on a sort of unerring plane of upwards and ascent. It's, there are pessimistic elements tugging at your elbow that, it's not always going to be like this. Now, Saeed, so this is written about the early days of the Israeli state, so sort of around 1948 to sort of 50s. And he's working with the state because he has a belief in the state. And his job is as a sort of trade union official for Palestinian workers. And that ostensibly is to make sure that the union isn't penetrated by communism and Marxist ideas, because that's associated to militant Palestinian sort of resistance groups and stuff. And we go through a series of ventures. As I say, he doesn't get too up, he doesn't get too down. He always gets out of trouble because he holds this post of essentially collaborating with the Israeli state. So the Israelis always cut him some slack when he sort of finds himself in a situation that he hasn't created, he hasn't made, but he's sort of swept up in it. And the Israelis sort of managed to sort of cut him free because he's a useful idiot, I suppose, to them. But eventually he does fall foul of it, fall foul of the Israeli state, because it's inevitable. As sort of repression gets more and more, you can't sort of stay out of being sort of smeared by it. It's a curious novel. It's quite fun, but it just seems, again, like a couple of other Palestinian novels I've read this year from that period. It just seems slightly sort of pickled in sort of aspic. It relates to sort of times which, while hardly halcyon for the Palestinians, compared to what it is now, post-intifadas, post sort of Gaza war, all this sort of stuff, post-security apartheid war, it just seems a world removed. And of course it isn't. It's the same tiny strip of land that we're dealing with. So it's a bit of a sort of historical curio. So if you're interested in that period, I'd recommend it. But if you're more sort of about sort of reading around the current situation in Israel-Palestine, it will probably be quite low on your sort of priority list. But it's good fun. 3.5 stars. And 2016 by Sarah Hesketh. So she had just lost her father, and 2016 to her was a signpost year anyway, because of 12 significant events that she lists and deals with in the book through interviewing people who were affected or involved in these 12 events. So I'll list them for you as she lists them. So the UK Brexit vote, the election of Donald Trump, the Syrian refugee crisis, mainly in the Mediterranean, the murder of the UK MP Jo Cox, who was a woman, the death of David Bowie, the death of Carrie Fisher, British Home Stores going to administration. So British Home Stores was a chain of cheap department stores where you could get cheap clothing and stuff. And I remember as a teenager, I bought my first ever black shirt from BHS because it was cheap. That was when in my punk days, not goth. I was never a goth. And it went bust in 2016 due to basically being embezzled by its owner. The re-election of Jeremy Corbyn as the Labour Party leader. Jeremy Corbyn has been the most left-wing leader of the Labour Party probably in history. Leicester City's fairy tale triumph in the Premier League, where they were 5,000 to 1 outsiders when the season started, and they ended up winning the league. Has never been done in the history of the Premier League, dating back to 1990s, and is unlikely to be done since. The growing climate crisis, as 2016 recorded the hottest global temperature rises since records began. Brackets, these records have since been exceeded. So through interviews, she interrogates all of these events. And I think in one respect, she does a really good job in that she reproduces people's speech patterns, including ums and ahs, where the sort of the monologue sort of drifts off or fades away, doesn't sort of complete its thought. And I think she does a good job in that because I think she's revealing all of us as human beings. It's really hard to string coherent thoughts together on the hoof, to be spontaneous and if you are able to, you're more likely to be glib, like a politician or a marketer. Someone who's rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed, so they've got it off pat. But these people are being interviewed. They don't know what's going to be asked of them, and their speech patterns trip them up as much as anything. And through that, you come to a realization that democracy is under crisis. It may always have been so, but it's under crisis because people are not sufficiently engaged with the issues that they're being asked to consider and vote on. So some of the things in here are just so, they just make you want. I mean, I lived through 2016, as everyone watching this probably did, unless you're 9 years old or 8 years old. And I don't believe I have 8-year-old viewers. A lot of this is centered around Britain, Brexit, obviously. It was a depressing time. I actually think that 2016 is no better or worse than any other year in the 21st century. I think it's a series of depressing times, as possibly we are de-evolving as a species. Maybe social media contributes to that. I don't know. I'm not going down that road in this video anyway. But as I say, it sort of degrades your faith in humanity, because humanity is barely able to express itself from one thought to another without losing the thread, without tripping over, without realising their own argument just doesn't make sense. And I'm going to give you 2 examples of that. So this is about getting excited about the election of Jeremy Corbyn. At the time he was seen as a figure of hope, as a bit like Trump, of sort of being from outside the political establishment, although obviously Corbyn on the left, Trump on the right. The joke being that Jeremy Corbyn has never had a proper job. He's only ever been a professional politician all his life, first at local council level and now as an MP. So actually he's not from outside the swamp at all. Anyway, so this is about getting excited that he'd won the leadership election to lead the Labour Party. But he still lost the election, although he did better than expected. And the reason he did better than expected was because the Conservative ruling party made such a mess of their campaign that they lost votes. It was absolute incompetence they still won the election, but they should have had a much bigger majority. Anyway, so this is one of the sort of people excited by the prospect of Corbyn. I didn't stay up to watch it, and I deleted my Facebook actually as well, because I was like, I can't bear all the bad news. And then when I woke up in the morning, it was like a lovely surprise that Labour had increased their number of MPs. And I was really excited and went, and we were cheering him, and there were loads of people. Well, not loads of people, there was like 20 people cheering him, but there was loads of cameras all surrounding him. So that was nice. So my 2 problems with what she said there is loads of people cheering. Actually, thinking about it, there were 20, which is hardly loads. It's hardly an endorsement. It's not that impressive. And then she finishes this with, so that was nice that he had TV cameras clicking away at him. What a bizarre thing to say. And then this other thing, this is about Brexit, trying to get Brexit done. What does it mean in legislative terms? And there was a complete stalemate in Parliament for 2 years because there were enough Remainers within the Conservative Party. They could never secure a majority on any vote around Brexit. And it got very heated. There were sort of moves that were made, parliamentary moves that were made that were felt to be illegal and were challenged in court. I mean, it's a really heightened period after the vote itself. So this is someone sort of commenting on sort of watching the coverage of it. I think we're paying far too much deference to bloody celebrities. Even the BBC now are saying, quote, "Oh, politicians and celebrities are calling for." What? Celebrities are calling for, are they? Are they really? Well, so what? Sing or act. Great. but I don't give them any authority. I blame John Lennon. I've got a John Lennon tattoo. It all started with him, honestly. Well, if you want a better expression of cognitive dissonance, of holding two contrary opinions at the same time and believing in both, you can't get better than that. She's blaming John Lennon for the rise of the importance of celebrity culture and celebrity vox pops and all that. But she herself has a tattoo of John Lennon, her hero, that she's memorialised by getting a tattoo of him. And yet she's saying, well, it's his fault that we've got this celebrity culture. So this book really drove me mad, probably because it did its job really well. But I don't feel grateful to it, other than that I'm doing an interview section in the novel I set down to write. But other than that, so I actually have to say I hated this book, but I actually think Sarah Hesketh did a really good job. She revealed us to ourselves. She revealed that you actually have to earn the responsibility to cast votes, not just have an opinion, but to do the research. And of course, so few people do that. People online. Doesn't matter if you're left or right politically, it's the same. People spout this stuff and they haven't done the research. And if they sat down and thought about it, they'd trip over the illogical nature of their own argument, like the people in here do. So this book was a thoroughly depressing experience, but really well rendered by the author. She did a great job. So I don't really know how to grade this. I mean, as a reading experience, it was 2, but as a work of art or literature, it's closer to 4. So take your pick. And finally, Allen Ginsberg's Howl. So I was familiar with Howl. I'd read it before. And I was due a free book on Thrift, the American secondhand book service. And you're limited to a maximum of $6, which rules out most books on there. But I thought, why not have a copy of Howl just in my library? So, and it comes with other poems, which I hadn't read any of them. Now, Howl is a great poem. It starts off with the immortal lines, which I've also used in one of my novels. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked. And then the rest of part 1 of the poem is to the nature of what has cracked those people's minds. It's about 60s America, everything to do with, sort of politics of race, politics of civil rights, politics of sort of feminism, politics of youth versus their elders, both the sort of resistance of this 60s generation, but also the price they paid that cracked their minds. And then part 2 is about the American state that they're fighting against, where everything is attributed to Mammon, the devil Mammon, who in John Milton's Paradise Lost is the devil responsible for the material world and for material riches and precious metals, all this sort of stuff. So he's always, in Milton, he portrayed him as sort of, always looking down on the pavement to see if there was gold there, kind of thing. And Ginsberg uses that figure of Mammon as sort of capitalism and, as I say, a sort of lust for wealth and material riches and stuff. And then part 3 is a quieter piece about a specific friend of his who he dedicates it to, whose name, sorry, not Mammon, he said Moloch, not Mammon, is somebody called Carl Solomon, who ended up in a mental asylum. So it's much more sort of poignant and tender. It's one of those, I don't know how old Carl Solomon was, I don't know who he is, but it's sort of suggesting maybe that he's one of the best minds of his generation that's been broken. So Howl is a great poem, and I recommend you read it. It's quite a long poem. It's about 20 odd pages. And then I read the rest of the poems in here, and they did nothing for me at all. And I'm beginning to wonder whether, for me, Allen Ginsberg is a great poet of the set piece poems, such as Howl, such as Mourner's Kaddish. But the rest of his stuff is fluff. Because I read earlier in this year his final book of poetry before he died, written in the years just before he died, I think, across the 4 years before he died, and it ain't great. So I'll post the link to my review. You can sort of digest it at your leisure. And as I say, so I'm wondering if it's not the body of work with Ginsberg, it's these grand sort of set pieces that he did that is why we revere him. And I think he should be revered. I think those poems are extraordinary. But the rest of his stuff, I'm not sure. I kind of need to read more of these sort of subsidiary poems, but maybe I don't have the appetite to. I don't know. Anyway, so that's it. That's almost the final read of my 2025. I'm currently reading an author I've heard a lot of good things in dispatches called Elizabeth Bowen, and it's her probably most famous book called The Last September. So that will be the last book I read in 2025. So it will be included in my stats, but it probably won't be reviewed until my first wrap up in January. And that's it, as I say, except for my 2025 best of. So keep an eye out for that. Till next time, thanks very much.